Hello, my name's Jamie and welcome to this video. Today, it's update day, hooray! So 2.93 has just come out. I did want to make use of the resources provided on blender.org, so this video is a day late for my regular upload schedule. That means we get to have a look at the pretty new release notes page together. So first of all, obviously in Blender, we've got a new splash screen. We're not going to spend too much time in Blender to start off with, but one of the main things that is happening in this update is a big update to the geometry nodes, which first came in the previous version. And there is now a tab at the top here where you can have a geometry node workspace. And you can see the new window type over here, which is the Spreadsheet Editor, which is available just over here by opening up Spreadsheet. So you can put that in any window like normal with Blender. So we can do that and put it there if we wanted to. And this is going to be really useful for having a quick overview of all the attributes of certain parts of objects. So based on the default values here, we can just come in here and choose a vertex and move that around, and you can see the value over here, number 4 or row 4. You can see the value changing, and then when I click to confirm, you can see that those values have updated there. Obviously, there's different parts here. It's always based on whatever object that you got selected, so depending on what attributes are available in the spreadsheet. It is worth mentioning that 2.93 is the second LTS release, so that's a long-term support release. So that means if you're planning to start up a big project and you don't want to have to deal with the regular updates to Blender, possibly breaking your scenes depending on what you're working on, then you can just pick that LTS version and stick with that. Any bug fixes and stuff will be applied to that, but they won't affect the general operation of Blender. And as they state, each LTS has a 2-year lifetime of support. Now onto the release notes. Now don't stress, it does say end of an era at the top here, but all they're talking about is the restructuring of how Blender is being developed and the version numbering. So Blender has been in the 2.x series for over 20 years now. So as we go down the release notes page, there is a few trailers and things to watch. Make sure you watch all these videos. They're really interesting stuff going on there. We've got some examples of what you can actually do with the new geometry nodes updates. And as you can see here, this is all of the new nodes that have been added to the geometry nodes workspace. So this is, big update for geometry nodes because there was only a few to start off with. I personally haven't really touched geometry nodes yet because the first version was pretty much just point distribution, which is fine, but you could already do that with particles, so it wasn't really anything too new. But as we come down here, you can actually see there's some new attributes that you can work with that can make some really cool and interesting effects. For example, the proximity here. I do really like the sample texture one, and the example that they've got here, which I'll just click play on. And you can see with the example here, they've got a video playing here as the texture. And you can see here that it's affecting the scale. So the scale of any cubes that are making up the points on this plane, their scale is being affected by the color of the video that's currently playing. And as they adjust the slider here, you can see how much influence that has. And so you can get a really cool effect in, 5 or 6 nodes to achieve an effect that used to be really quite difficult. And there's another example video here of the new volume to mesh nodes. And it shows you can make some really cool effects using volumetrics and just extending the use of the volumetrics and what you can do with them. There's a bunch of new handy primitive nodes for geometry nodes as well. So you can generate meshes on the fly without having to create new objects. And then there's all these other nodes. And here's a working example of what you can actually do with the geometry nodes. Create customizable buildings with just a few clicks of the button. You can have a completely different building. Some improvements to the user experience, like searching for new attributes so that you can actually see what's available, error notifications, and there's a little video here on the Spreadsheet Editor. And what I really like is, and I really like at the start here where they go into weight paint mode, and you can actually see down here the weights being applied to the different vertices and what those values are. That can really help for troubleshooting. If you are new to Blender, I definitely recommend going to the demo files page. And here you can see a bunch of demo files that are free to download that you can have a look at and take apart and see how things work. So at the top here, obviously we've got the splash screen. So each version of Blender gets a new splash screen made by someone in the community. And then as we keep going, there are some more specific files, so they each are showing off different features. This isn't really part of the update, but there is files in here that get added each time there is an update. For example, lots of the geometry nodes files are now new and updated here. And we'll take a look at a couple of those in a minute, actually. There's a few new updates to the sculpting workflow, which seems to be happening pretty frequently now. First up, there's a bit more flexibility in masking. So as you can see, you can use them to quickly generate some really cool results. You can use textures on your masks to make the actual masking a bit more interesting. And the workflow for the face sets has been updated as well, so you can change those really nicely and use them when you're actually using the pose brush as well, to make it easy to define how the pose brush is actually changing the mesh. Possibly one of the best underrated features is mousing over an object in sculpt mode and hitting D to switch to sculpting on that object, which will make it really good for once you say you've blocked in a character with a bunch of different objects. You can then switch between those objects really nice and quickly and sculpt on top of those. There's also a new line art modifier, which is really cool. Makes some really cool grease pencil effects around your models. Really cool way to make customized blueprints. And as you can see in the examples here, it'd be really good for creating a 2D hand-drawn effect. So I'm looking at this example here, and it's reminding me of the short film Paperman by Disney from a few years ago, where they created a short film in 3D, but then rendered it out to look like a 2D hand-drawn animation. Some more grease pencil updates with the interpolation tool, so the animation can be nice and smooth. And the new updates to the tool basically gives you more flexibility. They've updated the fill tool to close the gaps on any of your drawings nice and easy. You can customize that on the fly and then easily fill in colors nice and quickly. The multi-frame fill is super nice looking as well. You can see here they filled in just one frame. It's then filled in the same piece across multiple frames, which will speed up lots of people's workflows by a lot. There's lots more little updates as well. For grease pencil, I won't get into too many details for that. There's been some more updates to the Eevee render engine as well. It's looking much faster with some complicated effects like volumetrics, soft shadows, the area lights and stuff. I really like this feature here, where you can change how different components of the light affect the scene. So you see here when they turn up the diffuse, it's just the diffuse part of the texture that's being affected. And then when they turn up the specular, see all the specular highlights just coming up. A really great way of getting more control over how your scene looks. Some improvements to the depth of field is really nice. So you see here the old version. The best way to see is if you look at this pot lid up close, you can see it is blurry, but there's quite a defined line around here as well. And that's the old version. And then if we go to the new version, you can see that it's really nice and blurry, how you would actually expect the depth of field to look. Some lovely support for shadows in the volumetrics for Eevee as well. So rather than this fairly blown out look, you've actually got this really beautiful detailed look in exactly the same volumetric. And there's a bunch more little updates as well, where there's a lot of improvements in the quality and the speed of rendering an Eevee. They haven't ignored cycles either. So there's now persistent data, which is really good for when you're re-rendering lots of times, or if you've got an animation that you want to render. Basically only updates what has actually changed. They've updated the subsurface scattering algorithm. So for the random walk subsurface scattering, the old version was very grainy and much noisier compared to the duality guiding, which, as you can see here in the example, much reduces the noise by quite a lot. The open image denoiser has been updated, so you can get more detail out of lower samples in your renders. As you can see here, they've got a 4 sample render here with the open image denoising. If you look at the older version, so in 2.92, you can see, especially as you get further away from the camera, it basically just becomes a blurry mess. And then as we bring the slider over, you can actually see a lot more detail in the ripples in the sheets that are facing the camera. And then up close, it looks like the algorithm is doing better at capturing shading and the difference between the light parts and the darker parts. And there are a bunch more little updates. Quite a few of them seem to be focusing around the video sequence editor, which I know they've been talking about doing a big overhaul on. So it looks like that's starting to come through. So just quickly over in Blend, we'll take a quick look at some of those example files. So there's a nice still life here, which is similar to the splash screen by Arundel Woodford. And this looks like basically a less dense version of that, the splash screen. So if we go here, we can go splash screen. So you can see there's lots of detail, lots of different flowers, lots of different objects in the scene. This is very much the same style, but just a few less objects. So it's a bit easier to work with. There's a little bit of a write-up on the side here that sort of gives you a bit of an explanation of what's happening in the scene. And you can see down the bottom here the geometry nodes. So if you zoom in, you can then sort of see how everything is put together. Geometry nodes do seem to suffer from being very linear. So as you can see here, there's big long tracts of operators being done to certain objects and then it getting combined later on down into the actual object that's there. So this is all actually just one object. You can move it around. It's a bit slow in the scene because there's a lot going on there. You can see over here the different objects that are actually being used when needed. And then if we zoom in on one of the flowers here, you can actually see all of the seeds on the inside. They're actually monkey heads or Suzanne. So if we then come over here and look at all those pieces, you can see that there is, as the seed, it's actually a Suzanne or a monkey head, which is, quite funny. Nice little Easter egg there. If you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, you just sort of want to start to understand how things are working. If you come over here where we've got things like spiroception, or I think I was looking at this one earlier, the phyllotaxis. If we start adjusting this top one here, you can actually see this flower over here will start to be adjusted. You see we're just playing with the yellow part of that plant, and you can adjust these values and get, you know, a slightly different result. It helps to hold down shift while you're moving these sliders, because those small changes end up making fairly big effects. So that's a nice example of how to use geometry nodes to generate a bunch of interesting looking objects. And then next we have that buildings example. I'm just going to switch to flat shading. You can see the nodes over here, the node tree. It's pretty crazy and very geometric looking, but it's actually a bunch of different node groups that are being piped in together, and then they all come into this one here, and that gives you this. In the modifier over here, you can then actually just change some of these sliders, and it lets you affect what's going on. So if you play with the sliders here a little bit, you can change how the buildings look, and you know, it's a very easy. Quickly duplicate these, and then you can very quickly have different types of buildings. You have a really tall, skinny building, or a really short building. You can also switch out the different modules. So if you have, say, for example, your own window model, you can put that into here. And then there's all the extras, which is like all the window dressings and stuff. So then you can decide the quantity that you have, say, on the window shades, the little planter boxes in the windows. And you can see this is all only affecting this one building here. This building over here is a separate one. So you can see here we've got B1 ground floor with this one selected. And then with this one selected, we've got B3. And then over here, we've got B2. So there's a few different ones. And then the last example I wanted to take a quick look at is this tree. And it uses volumetrics to generate a mesh to create this moss that's all over the tree. So you can see here, there's a moss node group here. If we go to moss, you can actually see how it's been put together. So there's a bunch of nodes here that say, they call it a moss distribution density mask. Basically, it's just saying where to put moss and where not to put moss. And then over here, we've got the base mesh generation. So this is the main part. So you've got a bunch of points that have been generated, and then they turn the points into a volumetric. So it's a beautiful, cloudy sort of thing. And then they turn that volume into a mesh, give it a subdivision surface and different stuff, and then combine all that sort of stuff together, and you get the beautiful looking moss. And that's about it from me today. Hit like and subscribe to support the channel. There's a few links to stuff in the description, and until next time, I will see you later. Goodbye!